Hi Abigail, thanks so much
Hi.
for joining us on Britain's Birth Story podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Would you like to start off by telling us who's in your family and where you're all based?
Yep. Well, there's me and there's my partner Stuart and our kids, Ruby, who is nearly 8, and Sonny, who's just turned 5, and we're in Glasgow.
Wonderful, wonderful. And let's go straight on to your first pregnancy. Was this something that you'd thought about and planned, or was it something that had just happened?
No, we've been talking about it for a wee while. We've been together for about 3 years, and we've been talking about it, and I decided to go and I had a coil. I went and had it taken out, and we just thought we'd see what happened, and actually, amazingly, luckily, I got pregnant really quickly, which was great, really good.
Wow. And when you did get pregnant, had you even thought about where and how you'd like to give birth?
No, not at all. No, not really. At the time I worked in a hospital, in a children's hospital.
Right.
And I always just had the knowledge or the notion that I would give birth in hospital. But I hadn't really given any thought to what alternatives there might be. I was quite comfortable with being in a hospital setting, I think, because I worked there.
Yeah.
And so in my head, that was what was going to happen.
Right. And how supported did you feel at that time with your partner and your family? How was all that for you?
It was all pretty positive, to be honest. Ruby was the first grandchild in my side of the family. And she was not the first grandchild on the other side, but like only the second. So family-wise, I'm really close to my family, and I was really well supported, and the healthcare setting was really supportive as well. Yeah.
And did you end up giving birth in the hospital that you worked at, or did you go another route?
I did. I ended up giving birth in the hospital I worked at. And I went in, I was 2 days before my due date, and I went in the middle of the night, and I was there overnight, and I had her in the morning.
Wow, that's amazing. So if we can, I'd love to go into how your labour started and how you progressed through that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it was all pretty positive. So we'd done hypnobirthing. We'd done the Mongan hypnobirthing class.
Wonderful.
Having been to an NHS antenatal class and walked out of it after about half an hour because it was very based on pain and pain relief, and I wasn't really into all of that. I knew I wanted to have as natural a birth as possible, so we chose a hypnobirthing class with friends, and we both found that incredibly helpful and informative and empowering, particularly Stuart, who had no kind of previous knowledge or experience of birth or being around babies, and I hadn't either, to be honest. So we really felt informed and like we could make choices and everything that we wanted to make about the labour and the birth.
Yeah.
Having done the hypnobirthing, and I was really into yoga, and so I was quite in tune with my body, and I wasn't afraid of the process at all.
Yeah.
And the hypnobirthing really helped just to stay calm and everything, and I had a TENS machine as well just to help at the start. So I went into labour, sort of pains in my back started happening mid-afternoon one day. And I remember phoning my mum and saying, "Is this it? You know, could this be it?" It was two days before our estimated due date, and she said, "Yeah, it could be, but don't worry." And right enough, it was. So by about 10 o'clock that night, it was pretty certain that I was in labour. And I was bouncing away on a ball and watching TV, and I ended up not really using the hypnobirthing tracks in the end. I didn't really feel I needed them. I felt really calm and in control, and we put the TENS machine on, And that just really helped me to, I think, more as a distraction than anything else.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a lot now that I'm talking about birth, is in that big button on the TENS machine, when you have a contraction, it just gives you something to focus on, and it really distracts you. So that really helped. And by about 1 o'clock, I think, we'd phoned and said we were coming in. And the hospital was about 15 minutes away, 15 minutes away. So we went in, I'd asked for a pool, and that was all fine. And the labour progressed very smoothly, to be honest, in the water, right up until maybe a couple of hours before. And at that point, I was knackered. I was really tired. The baby's heart rate was dropping a bit. And so the midwife advised that maybe I should get out of the water and come up onto the bed. And I remember the transition stage just going, oh, what's going on? I can't do it. And my waters hadn't burst at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of the pool, the membranes in the water was kind of hanging in between my legs. And I was like, oh, what is that? What's going on? And I was saying, I don't want to be on a bed, I don't want to give birth on my back. And actually it was totally fine. I was on my side for the last stage.
Wow.
So the only little kind of sort of, and it wasn't even a panic moment, but was a kind of, we need to get this baby out. You know, you're really tired and the baby's really tired and her heart rate's dropping a bit. So let's have one last big effort and push to get her out. And that's all I needed, basically. The midwife had said, oh, if we don't get her out soon, there's a doctor coming behind the door. And there may have been and there may not, but that was what I needed, just to kind of give the last effort, you know. And at the time I thought nothing of it, and now that I look back, I'm like, you know, is that okay? Is that not okay? Is that coercion to a certain degree, or is that really what was happening? I never asked.
Yeah.
I never asked. You just put your trust in your caregivers, don't you? And because it was quite straightforward and it wasn't an emergency, I guess I just did what I was told.
Yeah. And then obviously, based on what you've said, I assume you were able to push her out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was.
I
was, and I had a wee bit of a tear, but it was fairly minor.
And how was the first few hours with her?
It was amazing, actually. I remember saying to people that when she was put on my chest, I could hardly believe that there was a baby. You know, even though you know that you're pregnant and you're going to have a baby and there's a baby inside you, that first moment where you see your baby, I was almost surprised that there was a baby there.
Yeah.
It's really hard to describe. I don't know if other people have described that moment to you in the same way. Yeah,
no, definitely. A lot of people would describe it more as shock, but obviously not in a horrendous way.
Just a shock and almost a disbelief, I suppose, that if she had put a puppy on my chest, I maybe would have had the same reaction. It's just a total disbelief that there's this person all of a sudden in your life. And the first few hours were absolutely fine. I was really lucky. I was taken up to postnatal ward and I was given my own room.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so we had a private space and my partner could stay and my family came, and within 24 hours I was home.
Wonderful. And had you thought much about feeding at this time?
I had, and the feeding bit is where it all went a bit kind of belly up, I guess, because I wanted to breastfeed. And when you're in and out that quickly in 36 hours from being in labour to out and home, there had been a kind of perfunctory, right, we'll get her feeding and make sure she's peeing and pooing and then we'll send you away. And first time mum, like every other mum, I just thought, well, this feeding thing will be fine, you know, that'll be easy. But we found it really difficult, and we persevered. And at 9 weeks, it was fine. We were feeding, it was fine, but I was in total agony.
Right.
And at 9 weeks, I phoned someone I know at the hospital, I phoned the infant feeding team and I asked for help.
Right.
And it was just a positioning thing. No one had ever really spoken to me. The community midwives that came out were great, but they hadn't really spent a lot of time with me talking about feeding. Mm-hmm. And maybe I just said, oh yeah, everything's fine, I'm feeding fine, and I didn't talk about how much it hurt because I assumed that's just what it was. And all it took from the infant feeding team was a look at the latch and a look at the positioning and a little bit of an adjustment, and everything was fine.
Wow.
And from then on, it was absolutely okay.
Oh, so, that's great. And how long did you manage to feed for?
I breastfed for just about a year. I think we stopped the day before Ruby's first birthday.
Amazing.
Yeah. And she was great. She was really good. She took a bottle of express milk, no problem.
Oh, that's great.
So I got a bit of time away as well. So she was great. She was a very sociable baby. She was happy to go to other people, be held by other people.
Yeah.
And to be fed however she needed to be fed. And I'm saying all of this because the second time around it was quite different.
Right. And based off what you've said, if you think about it now, how do you feel about the care you'd received during labour and even afterwards?
I have no complaints about the care I received.
Right.
None.
Great.
None. I felt really, really supported. The midwife in the labour suite in the delivery room knew that we were doing hypnobirthing. She left us alone. She was there when we needed her. The room was the way we wanted it, and we were really well supported. But it was a very uncomplicated labour and a very uncomplicated birth.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it would have been fine if it had gone any other way, but, it was quite straightforward.
Yeah.
So I was really grateful for that.
Wonderful. And moving to the next step, when did you think about having your second baby, or was that something that had just happened?
No, we'd been talking about it. It took a while I think I was probably ready before Stuart was. And then again, there was a kind of a plan and a coil removal. And the same thing happened again. Luckily, amazingly, I got pregnant very quickly.
Yeah.
And Ruby was just over 2. It was just after her second birthday.
Wonderful. And how did you want to birth this time? Had you thought about that in a different light?
No, actually, no. I was comfortable and confident with the way that things had gone the first time. So I had thought about home birth the second time, and just it wasn't for me. It wasn't for us to have a home birth. I was so comfortable with the hospital setting, and because it had gone smoothly the first time, a home birth just wasn't really in my mind at all.
Yeah.
So the plan was just to go back to the same hospital that we went to the first time.
That's wonderful. And how were you feeling now that you'd also have a toddler with you?
So I guess I was a bit more anxious, having been through birth before.
Yeah.
And experienced it, and whilst it was all manageable, I suppose then you think about what could have gone wrong the first time, and is it going to be the same again, and what complications. And by then a lot of my friends had also had babies and had not had as smooth an experience as me, so my head was kind of more full of the horror stories, of episiotomies and sections and forceps and inductions and everything. So and my anxiety was around, who's going to look after Ruby? Is everything going to be okay? And to combat it, what we did was take another hypnobirthing. We took a hypnobirthing refresher.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and as it happened, my cousin was a hypnobirthing teacher, so she did that with us, which was brilliant.
That's great. And going straight into it, can you recall how your labour began and how you progressed through that?
So this one was quite different. The pregnancy was straightforward again, really fine. But I went over my dates, and they started talking about induction at 39 weeks.
Right.
I was 39, and they started talking about induction at about 38, 39 weeks. If you go over, we're going to have to induce you. And I was really adamant that I didn't want to be induced.
Yeah.
And I went over, so I got to 40 weeks, and I went in for my appointment, and she said, right, well, let's do a sweep. And thinking about it now, and knowing what I know now, because I've now trained as a hypnobirthing teacher and I'm training as a doula, we did the sweep, and I consented to the sweep, but I didn't ask any questions at all.
Right.
about what the risks were and what the benefits were. And it sounds a bit daft having done 2 hypnobirthing classes before giving birth. It just didn't enter my mind. It was kind of like, well, this is what we do. At 40 weeks, we do a sweep. And I was like, okay. So that's what we did.
Right.
And she sent me away. And then my waters my waters went a tiny bit. And they had been kind of trickling a bit. And
right.
At 41 plus something, I can't remember, 2, something like that, I went in to be checked. And she said, right, well, what we'll do is we'll just book you in for an augmentation. And I didn't know what that meant. And she said, and I asked her to explain, and she said, well, it's an induction. This is what we have to do when your waters have gone. And I said, well, they've not really gone. It's just a wee bit. She didn't really explain. And I said, this isn't what I want. She said, well, we'll just make the appointment. It was for the next day. We'll just make the appointment. And I left. And when I left, I was like, no, hang on. This isn't what I want. And the day that she'd booked me in was a Friday. And I knew that if I went in on a Friday, I would give birth over the weekend. And I thought, I don't want to be giving birth over the weekend if I can help it, because there's less staff around and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I left, and then I phoned and I said, I don't want to come in to be induced. And the woman on the end of the phone said to me, what do you mean? What's your plan? And I said, well, I'll just wait till Monday. And she went, oh, okay. She didn't argue with me, and we left it like that. And then as it happened, so this was the Thursday, as it happened, I went into labour on my own on the Thursday night.
Wow.
So it was okay. It was okay. And the second labour was really fast, and felt quite different, because the baby was spine to spine, so it felt much more intense, and it was much quicker.
Wow. So how did you navigate this birth, getting to the hospital and getting yourself in that zone?
We, so when I realised I was in labour, very quickly phoned my mum. She came over. I'd already put the TENS machine on, and this time I did use hypnobirthing tracks, just to keep me calm, because the pain was much more intense than the first time around.
Yeah.
And we went into the hospital quite quickly. The whole process from the first contraction to the baby being born was just about 3 hours.
Right.
So it was much faster. And when we went in to the hospital, the midwife who triaged me was talking about pain a lot. And every time I had a contraction, she asked me if it was a pain. And Stuart had to take her out of the room and ask her to stop saying pain.
Yeah.
Because we just didn't want that word used. And then we had a discussion around whether or not I was allowed in the birthing pool because my waters had burst over 24 hours before. And This time I had done a bit of research, and I knew that the risk of going in a birthing pool was pretty small. And so in the end, it was fine. They filled the pool, and amazingly, the same midwife delivered the second baby that delivered the first.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And how was the pushing? Were you in a pool, or did you move somewhere else?
No, again, I was moved out of the pool, and I don't know. I can't remember if it was me or if it was the midwife that took me out of the pool. I have no memory of how that process happened. It was so quick,
Right.
and it was so intense. But again, I was out of the pool, and the pushing stage was. I remember looking at my notes. It was 14 minutes of pushing,
right,
and the baby was out.
Wow. And how were the first few hours with the baby?
The first few hours with the baby were fine. It was a wee boy. They wanted to discharge me after, put me on a 6-hour discharge. So he was born at 5 a.m, and they said, well, we'll have you home by lunchtime. And I was like, oh, okay.
Whoa.
And then what happened was I passed a huge clot when I went to the toilet, and they decided to keep me in overnight.
Yeah.
So what happened was that I passed the clot. I phoned I called and I said, this is what's happened. And they said, right, we'll get a doctor to come and have a look. And I went back to my bed in the labour in the postnatal ward, and the doctor came with a whole load of students and a great big plumber's torch. And I was like, you know those torches that have a big square button on the top, like a huge red thing. And I was like, what are you doing with that torch? And he used that torch to look inside me.
Oh my goodness.
I was like, okay. I was absolutely mortified. I'll never forget that as long as I live. And it sounds so trivial, but it just felt really bizarre.
Yeah.
Really bizarre. Anyway, I was fine. We established breastfeeding a lot easier the second time. Again, I did get help from afterwards. A few weeks afterwards, I went a lot sooner to get some help from the feeding team. Based on my first experience. But everything was okay.
Great. And how was the support that you received afterwards in terms of your midwives and your family?
It was good. It was really good. The community midwives were in for the first few days, and then really quickly established that we were absolutely fine, and we had a lot of support from family around.
Yeah.
The first few weeks we approached quite differently the second time, where we said, right, we're not having loads and loads of visitors, and we really hunkered down, and we didn't tell lots of people, and we just spent the first 2 weeks in a little bubble, just the four of us and immediate family for support.
Wow.
Which felt much more manageable than the first time when I was pinned to the couch breastfeeding, and it was just a parade of visitors to meet the baby. And we didn't do that. We deliberately didn't do that the second time around. You learn a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
From your first experience. And this time around, it was quite different. The baby was, he was a real mummy's boy. And he fed a lot. So he was on the breast a lot, and I didn't get a break. And he wouldn't, he wasn't hugely comfortable being taken out of a room and taken away from me. He cried when I left the room. And so it was quite overwhelming to have that, plus a 2 and a nearly 3-year-old as well.
Yeah.
It felt quite different, the second time.
So how was the overall transition from 1 to 2?
It was really hard.
Right.
It was really hard. But we had loads of support. The sleep deprivation, going from 1 to 2, the sleep deprivation, having a toddler and a newborn, I found incredibly difficult. I'm a really strong person, and I'm a really organised person, but I cannot function if I haven't had enough sleep. And it was torturous, because he he just fed and fed and fed all night, and he wouldn't go in a Moses basket or anything. He just wanted to be next to me. And the thing that really changed everything was when I just said, right, well, this is how it's going to be. And he came in the bed with me, and my partner went into the spare room.
Right.
And then everybody slept. And from then on, everything we did was based around how much sleep we could get.
Yeah.
And then everything was okay after that. You know, if we'd all had a good sleep, then we had a good day.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking back on the care that you received this time, what's your thoughts on it?
Again, I have no fault whatsoever.
Yeah.
No fault whatsoever. It was great. They were supportive. We had like I said, we had the same midwife the second time around. I had no idea at the time that she was the same woman until she said, "Oh, I remember you." And
Wow.
Stuart remembered her. I couldn't tell you now what she looked like.
Oh, that's amazing. And it sounds like you're at peace with the experiences that you've had.
Mhm. Yeah, I am, and it's funny knowing what I know now and having done all the training and the birthing training as a teacher and the doula training that I'm doing. I actually pulled my birth plan out to have a look, and it was like, if I looked at it now, knowing what I know, it wasn't the way that I would advise someone to write a birth plan. We hadn't considered lots of things.
Right.
I think we downloaded it from the internet and filled in some bits and pieces, and if I was to do it all again, there's a lot of things that I would probably do differently in terms of considering risks and benefits and different scenarios that we just didn't think about.
Yeah.
But we didn't need to.
Mhm.
So, in the end it was okay, but looking back and doing it again, I think I would prepare more.
Yeah. Wow, it's been great having you on to discuss two different experiences, but sort of in a positive way, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. They were both really positive. Honestly, they really were. And I feel really fortunate that I had two such positive experiences, because I know that a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
And so I don't take that for granted.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Anna.